Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773's Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including the Jake Feinberg Show. And we can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And it's been a wild last couple of weeks for me, traveling and traversing the landscape of our country and documenting the nexus between genius and addiction, being up in Shadowbrook, the home of Stan Getz. But it's great to reconnect with a guy who's given me a lot of his heart and a lot of his time. He seems to understand the sacred journey that I'm on, and he has always remained open. He has not closed his heart, and we love him for that. Dan Healy, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, what's going on?
A lot and a little, but I wanted to ask you. I spoke to the fish Barry Melton, and he talked about going to see Charles Mingus at the end of his career at the Both And he was stone cold broke. And I wanted to know, and there are other cats like that too, but I wanted you to talk about somebody it doesn't have to be in jazz, although that's how they treat their genius, how we treat our geniuses in some ways.
It wasn't just jazz that got mistreated.
Can you talk about somebody that you knew who was a genius who died broke?
Oh, yeah, Michael Bloomfield, Wayne Talbert, Doug Sahm. I can name lists of them. One of the things that in the late 60s, in 1968, I signed a contract in 67 and 68 with Mercury Records, and one of their spin-off labels was Smash. And to produce some records. During that time, I produced Tracy Nelson, Mother Earth album, and she had a band called Mother Earth, but that was also the name of the album. And I also did a bunch of other stuff with the Butterfield, Michael Bloomberg, Barry McGuire, and some people like that.
Really? Barry McGuire?
And what I did was... one of the things that happens, I had a hit. One of the records I did, well, they all were fairly successful.
Yeah.
One was like a #1 Billboard, which was with Doug Sahm. That's a song called Mendocino.
Right, I know that tune, yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things, and they probably still do it, but one of the things that they did really big in the record industry in those days was if you had a hit record, then let's see, I'm trying to give you an image of the thinking about it. But the thinking was that if you had one, then anybody that touched you was going to have a hit record, okay? And that's just one of those. There's a whole bunch of like senseless, pointless, stupid axioms that the record industry believed and probably still does believe today. Although today it's more like absolute, abject power over everybody, and to hell with anything anybody says. But at any rate, so one of the things they did was they brought by all of their talent. Mercury Records sent it to me into the studio with they sent them out to San Francisco because I wouldn't leave San Francisco, and I had my favorite studio, which I think I probably already told you, but the Kingston Trio owned one of the Flatiron buildings in San Francisco, and in the basement of it they had.
Yeah, we vetted this. Yeah. Big time.
Yeah, okay. The Columbus Recording.
Yeah.
And it was the first, in those days, it was the first 8-track studio in San Francisco. And in those days, an 8-track was just the absolute dripping state of the art. So, because most people were doing it stereo and 3-track and 4-track and stuff like that. So they ran by all of their talent and got me to do songs here and there. And another philosophy of the record company, at least in those days, record companies, was with like mud pies thrown at a wall. If you sling enough mud pies at the wall,
right.
some of them are bound to stick. Okay, so because that's what you do if you haven't any taste or any ability to tell art from garbage, right? And so they signed acts that made no sense and didn't sign really good musicians and stuff like that. But it didn't really matter anyway, because once they signed them, if you got a hit record, they also abuse you financially and every other way too. So they sent by all of their acts. Junior Parker was one of them.
Wow.
A whole bunch of them. I can't, right now it's not a good time to ask me because my brain ain't functioning in that
I'm
area,
actually going to help you out right now. We talked about Cauldron, Living with the Animals, Mother Earth, the Charlatans. I guess you probably did. Dan.
Charlatans.
Okay.
Yeah, but Charlatans was not. It was a Mercury.
Don Robertson, Sir Douglas Quintet. Continue. Yeah. So you were down there.
Anyway, and there were other blues guys. And I remembered being told a story about, I think it was Muddy Waters was in the studio, and I don't know if all your listeners, and for the edification of everybody out there that might just be learning about all this stuff, there was a time back in the 30s and 40s. Where the manufacturers made these little portable record recording cutting machines, okay, and they were like suitcases. And so a lot of record entrepreneurs would go down into the Deep South, for instance, and there was all these old like Lead Belly and people like that, black blues players and stuff. They would take them, buy a hotel room, buy them a fifth of whiskey, and bring them into a hotel room and set up this machine and record. And then they would give them, like, a bottle of whiskey or buy them a dinner or something like that. And they'd go back to Chicago or New York, wherever they were headquartered, and they would turn these into record albums and sell them and make a tremendous amount of money. And it was, like, below the radar of the mainstream, because in those days the mainstream was Decca Records and RCA, Capitol Records. Well, Capitol was actually a little bit cut above, because that was a product of musicians being sick and tired of what record companies were doing. But at any rate, they would sell these, and the mainstream guys, they all had the mainstream acts, Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby and all those people. So, if you weren't owned by those guys, and that prevailed probably still to this day. If you weren't owned by those guys, you got no slack anywhere. But at any rate, but there was this whole sort of subculture in they call it Poverty Row in the movie business in L.A., okay? It was like the third string record companies and stuff, the little one-horse record companies. Fantasy Records was one of them, okay?
Wow.
And they would record these guys and then take these masters and have them pressed into records, and there was a whole subculture of people that bought all of that music, and it wasn't fantastic like the mainstream was, but you could make a good living off of it. So, but anyway, so they'd sign these blues contract guys to like 99-year contracts and stuff, and they would pay them. In the case of the Muddy Waters story, they made a tremendous amount of money from them. What they gave them is they bought them a 5-acre farm out in the southern Illinois and gave him a new Cadillac. This is in 1953.
Wow.
And that's what he got, and in return for that, they got everything that they made off of him. Okay, so there's an example. All of those guys. So the record companies really, I'm kind of happy to see, not happy, but it's an interesting irony to see that the record industry is kind of going by the wayside, even though they still have a pretty good grip on it. But compared to what it used to be, it no longer is, and it's well deserved from the way that they've acted, But at any rate,
could you talk? I mean,
that's my story about people that. The people that died broke, okay?
Bloomfield, though, your peer, for instance, what did you take away from that? Was it shocking? I mean, because when I talked to, Duke Ellington, they'd send him out on these relentless tours, underfunded,
Exactly.
And it's
exactly.
like and what Melton was saying is like, is this how we treat our true geniuses?
Yes.
Yes.
No, it would break your heart. I mean, it made me so sad that I finally just said, you know what, stick this. Mercury wanted me to sign a 10-year contract, and I said, no, I will sign a 1-year contract. And when the 1 year was up, by the end of that year, I had seen enough and heard enough. Also, they chiseled me out of my royalties and stuff. I got burnt from most of my royalties from those guys. So, at the end of that year, it was like, no, I'm not re-signing. I'm not re-signing with anybody, and that's kind of what, I probably. It could probably be said that I blew my career in the record production industry, but so what? I've blown everything else in my life. I don't know why
and again, it's just. But okay, the last time we spoke, you and I want you to clarify this because this is very important. Is one reason I do my show, is the lineage of all music, and you mentioned, and I just want you. I'm not going to put the date in your head, but you said the first synthesizer was created in blank. I think you said 1929.
Yeah,
I just want
a long time ago.
I started this forum on Facebook, and cats like Rick Turner and all these other cats came out of the woodwork and said, Jake, please do some research. Healy got it wrong. I seem to have been off by Terman was given concerts with the instrument in 1920. Quoting from Wikipedia, while adapting the, I'm going to mispronounce some of these words, dielectric device by adding circuitry to generate an audio tone, Theremin noticed that the pitch change when his hand moved around in October 1920. He first demonstrated this to Loff, who called in other professors and students to hear. Theremin recalled trying to find the notes for tunes he remembered from what he played the cello, such as the Swan by Saint Saëns. By November 1920, Theremin had given his first public concert with the instrument, now modified with a horizontal volume antenna, replacing the earlier foot-operated volume control. He named it the Etherphone, to be known as the Terminvox in the Soviet Union or the Thereminvox in Germany, and later as the Theremin in the United States. But when you mentioned 1920, I just want to get your story when you think the first...
Oh, well, listen, first of all, my chronology, I do not guarantee, and I've already told you that. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what I said, but he manufactured one. They began manufacturing to sell. Theremin had his own stuff, and he performed, and he considered it his own trip, right?
Right.
But eventually, what happened was they began manufacturing them, and if I'm not mistaken, it was RCA that produced the first one that I was referring to. That was for sale, that anybody could buy, and that I think was in 1927. But as far as Theremin and how long he did it, I don't disagree with that at all. But it's also Wikipedia. Come on, give me a break, man.
Well, listen, I want to play you this audio track. This is an interview.
Is this gotcha? Is 20 questions of gotcha?
No. First of all, I just thought you might be all you said was, and it was very quick at the end of a long story, but you said, and I don't even care about the synthesizer, to be honest with you, and Wikipedia. It just caused an upstorm, or it caused a storm.
I'm sure it did.
But this is a game on this program called Name That Voice. This is an interview I did on New Year's Eve 2012. Just to let you know how long Dan Healy has been in my zeitgeist. So take a listen to this, and then we'll come back.
All right.
And you have to know that Mickey Hart's Ranch was a place to go to if you wanted to meet somebody, because his place was open. He had a barn in which he had set up a studio, and that barn was open 24/7, and you'd find people in there, musicians playing, just tinkering with the recording and finding new ideas. I mean, I would walk in there at 1 a.m. in the morning after just suddenly waking up, and I'd find Jerry Garcia sitting there, just playing guitar and trying to find some new ideas, and there would be Dan Healy on the board, and he'd say to Dan, "Oh, play that back to me. Let me see what I got." And stuff like that was going on at 1 a.m. in the morning. Or David Crosby would show up, or Grace Lake would be singing and for a new song idea. Or, stuff like that was going on all the time. Carlos Santana would come in and jam. I remember one day we played music for 4.5 days. I remember when we just got together and said, let's just play as long as we can. So the idea was to just play music. And there was Grace Lake, Jerry Garcia, David Crosby, David Freiberg, Paul Kantner, Carlos, myself, Mickey, Bill Kreutzmann, Phil Lash, all of us. We were just like and the whole point was at no given time there would be less than 2 people playing. So and the longest we went, I mean, at that time was like 4.5 days. So that was a place where musicians came together. Hamza Eldin was there, Ayrton Morera was there, Baba Olatunji was there. I mean, it was just like the place where everybody congregated. And
All right, Mr. Healy, who is that?
I don't know. Was it Zakir?
That was Zakir Hussain from New Year's 2000.
Yeah.
And
Zakir was just a fuzzy-faced kid.
I can't even now. Just the question is this. I mean, he talked about this 4.5 day. Where
we call them marathon sessions.
Can you break that down? And what?
What is there to break down?
Well, I just think what I'm trying to get at is like you talked to me about your sleep schedule. Basically, it's like midnight to 3. But I mean, like at that point in '74, 1 a.m. I mean, would you were behind the board and Jerry would say like, Dan, can you come in and record some of this and see how how much playing did you do during those times?
I did. I was playing right along with everybody else. I was kind of the de facto custodian of the studio in a weird way. But in those days, we didn't really live in the sort of conventional lifestyle form of getting up in the morning and having breakfast and doing your blah blah and going to bed at night and stuff. I mean, sometimes we would go for 3-4 days and not sleep at all, and then we'd go home and sleep for 2 days. And so I guess it's more like police and firemen and people, first responders who do those marathon things and stuff. But it was the way it worked is the motivation came from spontaneous discovering something spontaneous would happen, and you would be imbued with some musical idea or some concept that would start happening, and all of a sudden you'd start getting into it, and it seems like people just would show up and be, hey, what are you guys doing? And well, we're doing this. And, oh wow, mind if I get? No, come on, jump in, And I think I've said this before. Everybody, there wasn't any bosses, and there wasn't any particular. The whole sort of nature was to turn it loose and see where it goes, And I think I've said this before to you, Jake. That was our form of the release of creativity. So the structure was no structure, I guess you could say. But yeah, it went on. It went on pretty much like Zakir described it. A little bit of it is fancified for legendary purposes and stuff, but it all basically happened, and everything he said is basically true.
What was it like to? I mean, how did? I guess what I'm trying to get at is like you're talking about. I mean, Zakir was a baby, but his dad was Alu Raka. Ayrton was just off the Cannonball was getting. I don't know if you ever knew that, but Cannonball provided. He was the conduit to getting Ayrton and Florida citizenship here. Babatunde Olatunji was doing some kind of.
I loved him.
Can you talk about Babatunde and also how much?
I don't know that I'm an authority or qualified to talk about him other than my own experiences.
Yeah, of
with
course.
Him, but
that's what I meant. I mean, why did you love him?
First of all, he was a wonderful man. All right, gentle as gentle can be. Him and David Freiberg are probably the two most gentle people I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
And he had an ability to. There's a song that he has on the Olatunji album that we did there about a train that's going through. I can't say the name of his home state now. Northwestern Africa.
Let me go. Okay, continue. I'll look it up.
Yeah, which is really a horrible place politically now, but at the time, in those days, it was a pretty open and free place, and people were pretty happy. And he does a song about the train that goes by, and everybody and the way the train worked is that as it came by, you just jumped on and rode to where you wanted to go, and then jumped back off. So the train didn't have any stations or stopped or anything. It just was going, and it's fairly slow, and you jump on and ride it to where you wanted to go and bail out and stuff. But the nature of the song has a kind of happiness that gets down inside your heart that opens you up and makes you it inspires you about life and living and humanity, Anyway,
I
think in
is
a nutshell,
the village called Ajido or Badagry in Lagos?
I don't know. It's what's the name of the country?
This is in Nigeria.
No, yeah, Nigeria. Was it Nigeria?
He said he was born in
Yeah,
the
I guess
village.
so.
He
Yeah,
was-
yeah, I guess it is.
He
Yeah.
said the village was
Yeah.
Ajido, Ajido, near
Yeah, Ajido. Yeah.
Ajido.
Yeah. And he also had the loudest voice of any man I have ever known. He could distort a microphone. He had the loudest voice by twice of anybody that I ever heard. And when he turned it on, it would blow you away, man. And I didn't know, bless his heart, I don't know where he got, how he was gifted with his voice. He could modulate it really well. He was a great singer. And he wasn't particularly a loud person, but he could sure be loud, And that was like on a mechanical side, a little anecdote. I remember the first time I recorded him, I had to create special ways of using microphones, and had to create special things called loss pads and stuff to keep it from distorting the recording equipment and stuff. Anyway, that was a little funny anecdote. Baba Olatunji, I loved him.
I would like you to talk to the audience about specifically your, there again in '74, Mickey's Barn was wide open. You had this Sultan Khan come in, and you made this album that you engineered called The Music of India. But when did you become into? I mean, how did you?
A raving dork asshole. Oh, sometime
no, dude. No. You're the raga music. When did that? I mean, I know that there was the Ali Akbar Khan School of.
That was Mickey. Mickey
yeah.
Exploring rhythms. The whole thing about the barn was really Mickey's idea. He took some of his. When we would do a record, a Grateful Dead record, and everybody would get a little piece of money from the royalty payments and stuff like that. And he took his royalty money, and he went. You should get Mickey to tell you the whole story about the barn and Warner Brothers Records and a guy named Joe Smith, who was then, the CEO or president of Warner Brothers Records. And there's some great stories. Also, Rolling Thunder. That's a whole other one that you should, if you want to know about. He played a big role in the whole Hart's Barn thing. But he got money from Warner Brothers to make an album, and he took the money and built this barn. The barn was literally a milking barn. It had milk stalls in it and stuff like that, and we gutted it all out. It was a big old barn, big old solid redwood barn out in Nevada, and sort of northwest end of town. In those days, and now it's in town, but in those days it was kind of out in the country. But Mickey conned me into coming and getting involved and help and be the sort of the technical director to put the studio together. And I built the first version of the studio, and we used that for a while. And then I went off and did some other stuff. I went off and did. That's when I produced all the Quicksilver records and stuff. And then after that, I came back, and then I got re-involved again. In the meantime, we had to remodeled the barn and bought the record console from Pacific High Recording, which is another San Francisco story that you should do something on. PHR, I don't know if you're even aware of that.
Well, no, I mean, I'm trying to envision, were you behind the board for all that stuff? Merle and John Kahn and Jerry? And
yeah, of course. there was a creek bed down behind the Mickey's house. And it was we would take.
I know. I just want to finish. I want to finish the story.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
He said we tie a bunch of Mickey's gongs in the trees and blasted them into atoms.
Yeah, a couple of weird, funky guitar amps too.
So I mean, also the Cowboys and Indians meant. I mean, because Quicksilver lived right next to the barn, right? I mean, there was a lot of
No, that's not really true, but it's sort of figuratively true. And the whole Quicksilver thing was in a slightly different era. That was in the late '60s. You don't confuse Olima with Novato. Okay.
No, Mario was talking about. I was talking about the relationship between John and Jerry, and he said that the bands actually played Cowboys and Indians. I realized the properties were huge or very far apart, but I mean they in that time. Well, anyway, there was a mutual respect between the two bands.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know the story about the bus the Fillmore bus story, right?
No.
Didn't I tell you that one?
No. This is all new ground.
About Quicksilver was going to arrest the Grateful Dead, go in with guns and hold them up and take their instruments.
Never. No, this is fertile ground. Go ahead.
That's a fantastic story.
Good.
Anyway, it almost resulted in somebody getting killed, but only because of another set of circumstances. In the end, nothing really bad happened. But when we weren't recording and playing music at the barn, we would go, and David Crosby used to come, and Stephen Stills, and we would go down the creek bed, and everybody had, we all had guns in those days. Everybody, even machine guns and shit. So we'd go down there and just blaze away down the creek bed. And a couple of times we would take pieces of equipment down there and shoot them up. It was something to do. We were boys being boys. Boys having fun.
Could you expound on this story with Quicksilver and the Dead?
Not right now. Get David Freiberg to tell it.
Yeah, well, we got to convince him to come on the show. Do you feel like
David wound up going to jail over it? It was only for overnight, I think, but he wound up going to jail over it.
Wow. Yeah. No. I just wonder at that point in the Dead's career. I mean, Jerry he sought out Merle to learn jazz changes. You hear that in those Keystone shows. You talk about Pacific High Recorders. These guys were trying to stretch their vocabulary, but. How, if anything, did you talk about Olatunji, Airto, Rolling Thunder? You talk about Zakir. How much did they stretch out? How much did they help the Dead grow their own music?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that they had that much effect on the Grateful Dead as a band in itself. But Hart's Barn, which is where Hart's Barn was like where the Grateful Dead hung out, minus the Grateful Dead. If you understand what that means.
Not really, but that's okay.
Well, it was outside the structure of the Grateful Dead, so it was like where you went. We all had, in addition to the Grateful Dead, we all each had our own bands and stuff that we played in, or some kind of musical endeavor. Lesh and Phil, Ned Lagan had the computer music thing.
Sea Stones, that's right.
Jerry had the Jerry Band. Weir had Kingfish. I had the Healy Treese Band, and so we all kind of had. When we weren't doing Grateful Dead, we wanted to be in music, but you can only do one thing so much without getting burned out on it. So we wanted to go and be ourselves individually and cultivate our own music, and that's kind of where all of that happened. And Hart's Barn was one of the sort of main petri dishes of that whole thing. So John Cipollina spent as much time there as anybody did. Him and David Freiberg were there all the time. Garcia was there a lot. Garcia would come because he'd want to play something or try something musically, and he didn't necessarily want to do it within the context of the Grateful Dead formally, but he wanted to experiment, and probably it did have to do with learning. And one of the things he did is learning to use all the foot pedals and all the weird sounds. We had this machine that he called an insect fear device. And
well, yeah, that's what he called Cipollina's music too, right?
Yeah. it was a figure of speech that sort of meant something that sounded so weird that it would even scare insects. Okay. You know, it was based on. Haven't you ever seen the TV ads where you plug that little thing in the wall and all the bugs run out of your house?
Absolutely. I mean, it's legendary. I love it.
So it was a human version of that. Okay, which is really funny if you think about it. But anyway, so he played. He cultivated a lot of those kind of sounds, and also he hung out with me because I was always building that kind of stuff. And so Jerry was one of my really great testing guys because he had the head for it and he understood what some of the possibilities were, and he was the most game guy you ever would meet. He would never said no really to anything with respect to trying a new idea and stuff like that. So it was a perfect place. And so we kind of had in Hart's Barn, we sort of had a kind of a little mutual meeting. It was like a clubhouse. Okay, and a clubhouse with recording equipment and thousands of musical instruments and a huge big room to play in. And same with Mickey was doing his groove was rhythm and drums, and he began studying drums outside. I mean, he started out playing rudimental drums in the Marine Corps. Okay. He was in the military, and he was in the marching band playing paradiddles to march to, and so. He got to a place where he began getting interested in music and drumming from all over the world, in all different countries and all different eras and times and through history and stuff. And he began collecting. And Mickey has a fantastic collection of drums from all over the world that range from hundreds of years ago to modern day. So he's got now a room half the size of a football field that you almost can't walk in for all the drums and musical instruments and stuff, mostly rhythm type instruments. But he began to study that, and in his trek to learn all of that stuff and to unearth it and to search for it, he got to know Zach Ear, because Zach Ear is like, you never heard a better drummer than Zach Ear. I mean, he's just mind-blowing, you know. His dad,
Aldo Rocco, yep.
All of the different people, all the conga players, all of the sort of Cuban kind of music. That's another great source for rhythm. South American music, Indian music. Gee, it just goes on and on and on. And the various people that kind of represented those forms of music or had grown up in those forms of music were naturally attracted, and that's kind of how those guys all got involved. Airto and those guys got involved in the barn, and that was kind of their start into the whole sort of San Francisco music scene was through that little sort of wormhole of rhythms, of world rhythms and stuff. So that's kind of where all of those guys got involved and how they happened to get involved. And then what happened is they would be at the sessions, and along with Kantner and David Crosby and John Cipollina and Jerry and myself and Freiber, all of us that hung out there, and music would just start happening, and then this great combination of all these different players and their way of interpreting the music that they heard would begin to come together and gel, and some of it was just mind-blowing stuff, you know. I don't know that it ever, I mean, some of it actually progressed. There was a bunch of good songs that came out of it and good music that came out of it. But I think it was a life experience for all of us that is probably the most salient part of it. It's that it was really something that it happened outside of the world that we were sort of living in. It was like a free ride on the side, you know. And then it eventually dovetailed into, you know, it eventually came back into our lives and became interwoven and became part of the fabric of our lives.
I haven't seen, I don't watch TV. I cut my cable. I don't want to let my kids, and so I'm just,
either.
I'm immersed in sort of just getting off on primary source interviews. And for my kids, I don't want them to watch. But I haven't seen this new documentary on the Grateful Dead, but I want to, I just interviewed Shea Ray Sewell, the lead chef for the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about this guy because he was left out of this newest film and this sterilized.
What's his name? Who are you talking about?
Okay, so there was a cat that he had a restaurant called La Primavera in Oregon. He was a dead.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Shea Ray Sewell. He was a lead chef for you. I asked him, "Did you cook for Healy?" He said, "Of course." And so
yeah.
So my question is, I want you to talk in your own words, the guy that was left out of this film because it was a sterilized documentary. I haven't seen it, but I want you to talk about your relationship and what he meant to the band Rock Scully.
Yeah, I haven't seen the. I haven't seen.
He was not in the film at all.
Probably never will, but I'm not surprised that he was left out, given who I'm sure was meddling with the editing of it.
Well,
there's a whole other side of that whole thing
right.
that's not as pretty as you might like. Rock Scully was a good guy. Okay, he and Danny Rifkin were the two original managers of the Grateful Dead. Okay,
right,
and Rock was the kind of guy that he was like the kind of guy that had the forward ideas. He always knew. He was amazingly perceptive, and he always knew. He always could sense the pulse of what was going on. And in those days, you got to remember, back in like 1965, 66, 67, around in there was things were moving really, really fast. The whole LSD revolution was going on. The whole anti-war thing was going on. The whole there was a huge and humongous social revolution going on in this country, and it was really upending, and into the fact that it has uprooted the country to this day. We were sort of in the middle of that, and in those days you were being shot at from all sides. And so what happened is Rock was one of those guys that knew how to read the tea leaves, I guess, read what was going on. And he was the guy that kind of kept us a step ahead. We didn't really want to be that involved in politics, although there were perpetual streams of organizations and people that were trying to conscript us because we were popular. We were shakers and movers.
Of course.
And so people that have those kind of agendas want to attach their wagon to you and let you drag them around. And so we spent, particularly Jerry, a tremendous amount of time eschewing the political aspects of the whole social revolution. We wanted, and I've said this to you before, we didn't want to get sidetracked. We wanted to do music. So we didn't grab the microphones and scream obscenities about politicians and stuff like that. Instead, what we did was we played music. And in fact, at one point when people would jump up on the stage, Garcia finally once said, "Not at Grateful Dead shows. The microphones are here for the musicians." Okay, that was a statement that he made, and that was like, "Shut the fuck up."
Right.
I think it was like Wavy Gravy or one of those nitwits that was out there blowing his face off about something. But the Rock was the kind of guy that he was responsible for the sneak attack gigs in Golden Gate Park and stuff. We would stay up like the night before and plan stuff, and we would secretly rent a flatbed truck and a generator and put everything together and show up in Speedway Meadows on Sunday morning and play a free gig. And it was like an attack of music, a music attack. In out of nowhere, it's completely unplanned.
Totally.
And of course,
yeah.
Rock was that guy that he would help plan it, but he was also the guy, and we used to be sworn to secrecy. Nobody tell anybody about this. You have to sign in blood. You don't say anything about it. But then, of course, the next day the radio stations would be there and stuff like that. So Rock was the guy that leaked it. He made everybody promise to not say anything, and then leaked it to the press because he knew how to manipulate and play them. And so Rock was a promoter, and he was a controversial figure over a lot of stuff, but he not ever to me. I knew exactly who he was, and to the day he died, he was the same Rock that I always knew. First day I met him, he did. He was a promoter, and he was a damn good promoter. I think that there was probably one or two members that there were people in the Grateful Dead that if you didn't subscribe to their way of looking at things, then they would kind of go out of their way to make things tough for you. Okay, and which is an unfortunate sidetrack, but there are people that confused talent and tyrant. Okay, I'll just put it like that. So he probably was left out of this whatever this documentary you're talking about, which I haven't seen and probably won't ever see because I don't really like. That's all water under the bridge to me, so I don't really give a damn what happened. But
I mean, didn't you lived it anyway? I mean, this is I guess I guess I'm just trying to figure out why a band that expressed themselves musically and was not into giving these speeches. The microphones are for the music. Maybe it's just old age, but it's like Scully. I mean, Scully when Mickey Hart had Rock Scully go to Matt Kelly and say, listen, Mickey you talked about they all had their secondary gigs. Kreutzmann was learning jazz with Jerry.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And Rock goes and says, hey, Chris Harold, he's not really a great drummer, but, we want Mickey. Mickey needs his gig, and they said, fuck off. Mickey can't really keep time. So, the point is he did so much work for the band. He made
Actually, Rex Jackson was the one that turned the trick for Mickey back in the band, getting him back in the band.
You mean back in the Dead?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was talking. Yeah. So my point is that why is there this was Tyranny a fear of Dan Healy with the Dead? I mean, I don't see anybody with I mean, it was Rock tyrannical at times.
No, it wasn't Rock I was referring to.
No, I know, but I mean,
there was a couple of band members that were and still are raving assholes. All right, how blunt do I have to be? And those people always have their face in everything, and always either behind the scenes manipulating stuff or right out in front blatantly fucking with stuff. Okay, and so
good to know. This is good.
I can't answer for that because it wasn't me.
Well, no, I was referring to So anyway, one more audio.
I don't know what you're asking, man. What are you asking?
Well, no, what I was saying was it seemed like Rock had a lot of power, but he did a lot of great stuff for the band, and maybe he enabled. Some people say that when Jerry lived alone, or in those dark days, like he fed. They kept saying he fed Jerry's drug habit, or he was.
No, he didn't. Jerry fed his own drug habit. Okay.
Right.
Come on, man.
Well, no, and what I'm trying to get at is
it's like what is Jerry, some kind of hopeless little thing that didn't have any control over himself?
Yeah. Well, no, I'm saying, but so it leaves me. I can't understand why he would be left out of something that I probably will never see. But I wanted to get on the record what his significance was. Again, I've been trying to extract these jazz tapes with Giannini and Healy and the Treese Band for some time, and now I've discovered a new music here. I want to play you this audio that I have, and then have you extrapolate on this. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, and then gosh, I remember him recording, and I think it was Dan Healy and Darlene Dominico with my beloved Philo, who had built the most beautiful music studio in Compshe, the middle of nowhere, way ahead of his time, echo chambers, and he recorded some songs there too with Dan Healy. Oh, I think the few things that interested him, but he didn't practice a lot. He had his chops down. He just would go in and play. It was always amazing, and I think he was just part of the group. I wouldn't say he was necessarily the leader. Now, maybe now with his Molly 7 or that other group.
All right. I just want to be clear. You don't have to answer this either way, but I just hope that Bill Kreutzmann is not one of the raving assholes in the band.
No, actually, yeah, I got to tell you something. Deep down in my heart, I love Kreutzmann with all my heart. Okay.
I love you say that.
And I never say. And Kreutzmann, listen, let me tell you something. Kreutzmann never is not that kind of guy. Kreutzmann doesn't get up in the morning thinking how he's going to scam his way through the day. He doesn't go to bed at night angry at people and stuff. He doesn't even live in that world. He's much simpler and easier going than that. He gets up and is ready to be happy. All right?
I dig. And that was his wonderful.
He's not a negative guy by any stretch.
Well, we're just this is process of elimination, but it's interesting to hear this and That was his wonderful second wife, Shelley Kreutzmann, who came on my show.
Yeah,
who came on
I
my
love Shelley.
Such a beautiful person. December of last year, and now Healy, the onus is on. What are these Darlene Dominico sessions? And also,
it was Dano and the Danettes was one of the
Dano and the Danettes. Please take us through that.
Well, Darlene, I inherited Darlene through Hart's Barn. Okay.
Got it.
I met her through hanging out, and I'm not sure who brought her to Hart's Barn, but she was like a sort of a solo folk guitar singer chick, kind of, because there were a bunch from the late 50s and early 60s, a sort of kind of from the world of Judy Collins and Joan Baez and all that. Maybe not quite as political, but that sort of solo chick playing guitar and singing, folk song chick. So she was that one, and I know that I know how she got there. I know, but I don't know enough about it to say it. But there were other people. There was a lady named Opal Willie that was involved, and a bunch of there was some famous old '50s beatniks from New York that were involved there, that were friends that came out and that were somehow friends of Mickey's. And like I said, I don't really know enough about I can't remember enough about all the names and stuff. But at any rate, I inherited Darlene from the barn. So she was there hanging out, and I was just playing one day, and she came in and sat down and started playing and singing with me, right? And so we started learning songs together, and we pretty soon we had enough for a whole set. And we had rehearsed all the vocals and had worked out all the vocals and stuff like that. We also used to play with John Dawson, Marmaduke.
Wow.
We had a little group called Huey, Louie, and Dewey.
Oh, but the Danettes. I mean, that's the Dano and the Danettes. I mean, I've never heard of this band.
That was in the 80s. In the early 80s.
Okay, so you're tracing back the lineage of when you actually. So you started to cook with her in the barn. You got to
in the 70s.
Yeah.
70, 71, 72, 69, 70, around in there. 71. Then there's another lady named Catherine Summer, who was the other Danette. So Darlene and Catherine were the Danettes. And so in the 80s, we had a group called Dano and the Danettes.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Where are the we need, this is, and who was Kreutzmann playing drums?
He did sometimes. We oftentimes played, just the three of us.
Wow.
Without any accompaniment, but we also had a band thing, and Kreutzmann was a band, and Garcia would come and sit in with us sometimes and stuff. And that's when I had my radio station up in Humboldt County. I used to own a fantastic FM station called The Mighty Urge, KERG, in Garberville. And so in those days, I was in the early 80s. But before that, with Darlene and I just alone singing, was the two of us had a duo act, and we traveled across the country playing in clubs and stuff. And
you were playing acoustic guitar or bass?
I was playing electric guitar, Fender Strat, and she had a pickup on her acoustic guitar that I forced her to do. She was strictly one of those acoustic people, you know. And I don't know, have you ever explored the revolution, the electric revolution? Have you ever seen the film clip where they were going to lynch Bob Dylan for playing an electric guitar?
Well, I vetted it with, I vetted it with enough of the cats that were on that stage.
So you're aware that there was a huge rivalry at one point,
absolutely.
Right?
Dude, they went, him and Lomax went to blows at the folk festival. Actually, that might have been when he put a trap set on the stage, but yeah, I'm aware of it, sure.
How dare you?
How dare you, right, yeah.
So at any rate, but the thing about it is that in those days, sound systems weren't anywhere near as good as they were today. In fact, they were downright funky. And so in order to have your songs and music heard, you had to be very careful with what you did. And so you couldn't play an acoustic guitar in a club and expect to have your guitar heard just by the sound guy putting a microphone on it. So I conjure into. We had these little teeny, they were real small amps and stuff, but I wanted to play an electric guitar. So the two of us would play, and we just went out and did toured for a while, and we played around a lot. And in those days, John Dawson was also, he used to live in my house with me for I don't, maybe a year, and this is like 1970, I guess.
Wow.
71. And so the three of us, Darlene and Marmaduke and me, had Huey, Louie, and Dewey, and we would go, and because we would sit around at dinner table and pick and play all night and stuff, and so we had enough songs together. We would go out and perform and do songs around. There's tapes of us somewhere. I've heard tapes of us doing it.
Well, I mean, and then in the '80s, what was? Did you actually got in? Was that in Philo's studio, or was that in your studio when you did Darlene? What was Shelley referring to there in the?
Oh, Philo's had a great, beautiful studio in Camchi, which is a little town by Mendocino, and he had a gorgeous studio that he had built. And this is, and he was a player too, and he had a little band. And Billy also lived in Camchi, which is how I got to know Philo. And so we would go down, we'd go down to Fort Bragg, and where all the nightclubs were, and he'd be playing there. So Billy and I would go and sit in. Richard and Billy and I would go and sit in with him.
Oh, this is I need a couple of tapes of this. This is unbelievable, man. I mean, are you kidding me? What about Laser Murphy?
Laser Murphy was Darlene's. After Darlene and after I got sidetracked doing other stuff, and Darlene, Laser became Darlene's guitar player, took my place. Okay, but also they were friends and stuff, and so he was in. He was. I guess they had a band. She had the Ramrods, the band called the Ramrods.
Ramrods.
Yeah, and they made a couple records and stuff. And at any rate, so she went off and did that, and then and that's towards the end of the 70s. And then when I decided when I built the radio station up in Garberville, I hired Darlene came. I needed Darlene to come and help me put it together. I had to summon everybody I knew that had a half a brain, and to come up and join in the brain trust with us, and of course Patty, the fabulous Patty.
Yes.
And we went and did it. And Larry Murphy is his name. Larry the Laser came with her. He was sort of her baggage, and so he came along, and he was one of our helpers up there. And along with several other people, we built the Mighty Urge. The
Mighty Urge. I mean, programmatically, what did that look like? Were you playing tunes? Were you interviewing people? How did that? You just built the station, or were you actually a host as well?
Darlene and I did the Dan and Dar show in the morning. We did the morning drive time show. That's a whole side of me that nobody. One of the things that I've noticed that has happened is, with respect to reference to me, it's kind of commonly. It became commonly established somehow that outside of the Grateful Dead, I didn't have any life at all.
Bullshit.
Right.
Bullshit.
And actually, the Grateful Dead was only maybe half of my life, if that much, and then that might have been more than I should have let it have. So anyway. So because of that, you don't see any of that stuff. Never comes up in Wikipedia or in documentaries, and all the pundits and all of the people that write books. There's so many people that write Grateful Dead books that just weren't there, have no idea what was really going on or what it was like, and yet somehow they in a position to write books and pontificate on who all was doing what and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that goes on.
Well, I mean, and why do you think we're sitting here doing this now? So, I mean, here the reality is this: is that how did you, being somebody who eventually you learned your trade, eventually didn't have to man the main board at Dead shows, but you went around and made the stadiums or the gyms even more audibly enticing for the audiences after a while. But when you would go on the road with Darlene and with Marmaduke, or even with, I mean, how did you let go of the idea of not if you had somebody who was
of no control of the sound?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll tell you how that works. I had a strict rule with myself that I had two completely separate jackets, and when I had my musician jacket on, I did not have a sound or a record producer jacket. So I would go into clubs and stuff, and of course the little sound guy would just be shaking in his boots, petrified, right? And I would have to say, listen, I'm not here. You just do what you do. Everything is fine. And I never dressed people down. I never made them feel weird about it, because I came from that place, and I knew that it was already a scary situation for young guys. Being, here the sound legend is here in my club singing, and I'm running the sound. You know how that must feel, right? So I never really. I went the opposite direction. You can't really do both. That's why musicians should not produce their own records. You can't do. There's just no. I don't care. It's just like you can't do two things at once. You can't. You can do. You might be able to interlace and interleave a couple of things, but it's actually at once. No, you can't. You can only do one thing. So when you're singing or playing and being the creative you, then the other you has to just pass it on to somebody else, and that's just as a fact of life.
You refer, again, just in jest, you refer to how did you develop the sound legend? I mean, you claim that, your story is not, the full Dan Healy story is not told, but people were shaking in their boots because you had a reputation. Was that only from the Grateful Dead recordings, or?
Yeah. It was. Well, I was there. Well, back in the early days, no one, when you first started out, no one's a legend when they first started out, except for maybe a serial killer or something.
Well, as Gil Scott Heron, a legend in their own mind, but yeah.
Right. Well, there's always that. But the by the time by the 70s, I was pretty well known in the circles, and by the 80s, I was really well known, because the Grateful Dead. I'm most proud of my sound work in the Grateful Dead. I took and translated what those guys were, the music, the sort of musical intention. I was able to translate that to vast bodies of people. All right, via the sound system, and not, which really was more than just on the spot. It had to do with weeks and weeks and months and years of preparation and learning and studying and designing and building, and successes and failures, and on and on and on. It was built gradually. It was an edifice, one brick at a time, and we were able to establish and create a whole concept that had never been realized before, in terms of involving an audience of like at Madison Square Garden or at Giant Stadium or some huge venue, where it was possible to buy a ticket and sit in your seat and be like you were sitting in your living room in front of a fantastic stereo. Okay, and that took a tremendous commitment by a lot of people, tremendous investment of money, and a monumental investment of time and effort. And I was given the position of being one of the persons that led that and headed it up, and that's a gift that's unincalculably fantastic. Okay. And so that's my position. My position is a position of thanks for that. So it's not so much to individuals, but to the event that happened that changed music and the perception of music and live concerts and stuff forever.
Before I let you go, we've been cooking here for an hour again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and again, you just opened a Pandora's box with this Garberville radio station. But I had a kind of a disillusioned interview with John Perry Barlow. Lisa Mydland was furious. He kind of just made it out like, he just started to pick up collaborating with Brent in the late 80s, like a year before Brent died. And I realized that Barlow is going through things that I can't even really understand right now. But I wanted to ask you, truthfully, when Brent, was it astounding to you in some ways? I know Keith and Donna had run its course, but two-part question. Was it astounding to you that Brent expanded the sonic nature of the band? And what rig, if any, did you build for Brent?
I didn't. I had not very much to do with Brent's equipment. What happened is that Yamaha did some PhD did the algorithm of mapping out a concert grand piano. I think it was a Steinway or a Baldwin 9-foot Steinway, a Steinway or a grand piano, 9-foot concert grand piano.
Right.
Mapped out and then did the algorithm and then wrote it and created it synthetically and put it into chips and built a keyboard around it, and that became the Yamaha electronic piano. And it had action like a real piano, but it was synthetic, no strings at all on it, and it sounded exactly like a piano because they had mapped out a real piano and literally recreated every timbre of the actual of a real piano. So it had the sound of a concert grand. And when that happened, it was a matter of plug up some amplifiers and speakers and turn it on. So there really wasn't. It was before him that the Countryman piano pickup, which I originally designed or I contrived and got Carl Countryman to build, was for Nicky Hopkins in Quicksilver, and that was the first one. And then it became. Then I used it in the Grateful Dead, and then that was pretty fantastic. And it had its own speaker system and everything, including starting with the wall of sound and up until the Yamaha piano came. It was tremendously complicated to set up the Countryman pickup, but it was the best sounding of all of them. But the crew guys had a hard time setting it up, and it really was a precision piece of equipment. And what happened is that we would get a piano delivered. I don't know. We were Baldwin artists, so if you're a Baldwin artist, the Baldwin would bring in any town you're at. They would bring a concert grand piano and set it up and take it away, and that was part of being a Baldwin artist. And anyway, so we would install this piano pickup on these fantastic concert grand pianos, and it worked really pretty well. But it was just monumentally complicated. It was like any fine-tuned, complex piece of machinery. It's the amount of hassle is kind of almost outweighed by the complexity and intricacy of making it work. But at any rate, Brent was Brent. I mean, the Grateful Dead ate up keyboard players, starting with Pigpen and ending with Vince.
Right.
There wasn't a single non-tragic keyboard player in the Grateful Dead that was actually a member of the band. And everybody has theories on it. I have a theory on it. Well, it doesn't really matter. It turned out to be in retrospect, it turned out to have been true. So I'm not sure why that is and what all is involved in it. I think it has to do with playing music. It has to do with the difference between what you do with a guitar and what you do with a keyboard. Okay, if I have any theories, it's along those lines. Okay.
I'm going to read this from Barlow, and I want you to cross-check this because I don't think this is accurate, but I don't know. He said the band never slighted Brent. He was the only person that they all listened to in their onstage mix. They all had ear monitors, and everybody had a different mix. Many people were basically missing from some other people's mix. Brent was the only person that everybody was listening to. He was what they were queuing on. He was hugely important. Now,
yeah, I don't know. I think that might be a little overly stated, but there were a lot of people that didn't have other people in their mixes. But I don't. The ear monitors was disastrous. I mean, I understand why it wanted to happen, and it happened, but the Grateful Dead never really recovered from it, and the music unfortunately suffered tremendously. But
when did they come into play? When did the ear monitors come in?
Oh, in the mid '90s.
Well, that was after, but Brent had already died at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Just before. Before. Yeah. I don't remember. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to think. I don't remember. Brent was there maybe for the very onset of it. That's why I said I think it's a little overstated. Okay, for the very onset. I'd have to go look that up. I'm not sure exactly when.
No problem.
We started with the in-ear monitors, but it was in the 90s.
Well, can you go a little bit farther on this guitar keyboard theory? That's really fascinating.
Well, I think that you don't. When you're a keyboard player, you might play a diminished chord, whereas if you're a rock and roll guitar player, you might not know what a diminished chord is. And so I think there's a certain amount of frustration in the sort of pedanticness of 1-3-5, 1-5-7. 1-4-5 chord changes and stuff, mostly in either a major chord or a minor chord, and anything beyond that was kind of over everybody's head. And that's the nature of rock and roll. And so if you're classically trained, or not, I don't mean classically trained, I mean to say formally trained keyboard player, then that kind of stuff is like you learned that when you were in the third grade. Your music teacher rapped you on the knuckles, right? So the sophistication of the approach to music was really limited in the Grateful Dead. It's not just the Grateful Dead. Pretty much all of rock and roll is based on forms of folk and country music, which is really unsophisticated and really deals with just major chords and open tunings and stuff like that. So to get into the minutia of what Errol Garner could get into,
right,
or George Shearing could get into.
I dig. And just to be clear, you feel like that was because of the chops that the keyboard players brought into the band, it was deflating for them when they couldn't. Yeah, it was not recognized.
Kind of the idea. That's kind of the well, and it was like, Jesus Christ, I'd like to play something fun here. Can I stretch out a little bit? But if I do, these guys are going to get lost.
Well, I mean, did you listen to the? I mean, dude, the sound that you were getting in '83 from that Harrisburg show where it was the 3 Mile Island thing. I mean, that Brent sounded like he was having a great time there. But I mean, that's a really interesting theory that it was humbling because of this sort of the, not the rigidity, but the lack of vocabulary in the band.
Hey man, that's just my opinion.
Hey man, so I'm coming out to stay at the Cipollina residence in December, so I feel like our next installment should be in.
What, you mean at John's house? With Sheesh?
Well, Mario's going to find me a place to crash, but I am looking to. We're going to do the definitive Cipollina, Hunter S. Thompson, Gonzo journalism for those 4.
Oh, right on.
So if you're, I think that's where our next installment should be, is face to face. I think we've done enough on the phone here. Okay,
well, you know that as far as I'm concerned, John was the fabulous John.
I also want to tell you, I feel like, I've transcribed almost our first 2 interviews, and Healy, I mean, it's great to put the stuff up on Facebook, but I would like for you to think about, maybe a book, or, I mean, this is so important to. I have a book. I've been preparing for a book for years. I've got a huge binders full of notes and stuff. I just think some of these stories could be possibly included in it, because a lot of it is, it's. Yeah, I got an idea for a book that, I need someone to help me put it together, but because I don't have the time or the expertise. I'm a good writer, and because I'm a good storyteller, but as far as collating it all and editing it all and stuff like that, I need help along those lines. Well, maybe I can do something along those lines too, but. Yeah, December, I'll let you know, but I'm coming out right before Christmas. I would love to catch a hang. Hey, well, we'll see what happens. And, best to all your listeners, man. All right, Healy. Much love. Uh-huh. Later on. Part 3 in the books with Dan Healy, and to many future conversations. We'll be back tomorrow with the legendary Stafford James. Until then, peace.